Barry Neufeld, a former school trustee who opposed gender ideology in schools, has been ordered by the BC Human Rights Tribunal to pay the Chilliwack Teachers Association $750,000. Why? Because he had the audacity to oppose gender ideology in school. What a concept. My name is Nico Lagan, and I'm too conservative for the conservatives. My co-host, Rob Ambrose, not woke enough for the liberals. We are the political orphans. To speak about this story, Bill C4 and also Bill C16, we are joined by Senior Fellow at Macdonald-Laurier Institute, Director of Genspect Canada, co-host of Beyond Gender, author of the WPATH Files, Mia Hughes. Mia, welcome. Welcome. Nice to have you on again.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be back already so soon.
Yeah, it's been so soon. It's great.
You know, when it makes sense, it makes sense. And this does not make sense. So you need to somehow
make it
make sense of the nonsense that's currently taking place. I know it's quite
a tough job.
The ask, but I expect you to be able to live up to it. So that's my expectation. So pressure's on. Pressure is on. So let's start at the beginning. I'm going to bring up, I'm going to quote you here. This is something you posted, I believe it was last week. Yeah, last week. You described this, and I quote, the single most insane ruling thus far in the gender insanity came of the BC Human Rights Tribunal yesterday. The tribunal ruled that saying you do not believe in gender identities amounts to the existential denial of trans people and is therefore discrimination. The school board trustee, Barry Neufeld, must now pay a $750,000 penalty for his lack of belief in gender souls. It's hard for me to say it as I'm reading it. Like, I fumble because I can't believe this crap. This is absolutely insane. So can you explain to us what happened and why do you think it's the craziest ruling thus far? Because there's been some crazy ones.
Well, okay. So first of all, why I'm putting it into the craziest is $750,000. We are talking for lack of belief, for his comments and for commenting on this insane medical scandal, but just the scale of the penalty to be paid to all of these, you know, so-called LGBTQ staff members of the school board who suffered pain because of his comments. But the story of how we got here is quite the story. First of all, Neufeld's story in and of itself is too long and complicated for me to go into. You've got defamation, you've got anti-SLAPP, you've got human rights, hate speech, and discrimination cases. And it's been a 9-year legal nightmare for this man. So we won't go, there's no point going into all of that. The most important thing about this ruling, this particular BC Human Rights Tribunal ruling, is the definition of discrimination. So there's an astonishing passage. I think it's on page, actually, I'm not sure. I don't know what page it's on. There's an astonishing part where they're talking about discrimination. And in Neufeld's closing remarks, he said, I don't believe in gender identities, and gender identity ideology is a belief system akin to religion, something like that. And then the BC Human Rights Tribunal say that is evidence of existential denial. He is denying the existence of transgender people because the definition of a transgender person, and they lift this from a Supreme Court ruling, the definition of a trans person is an individual whose gender identity does not match the sex they were assigned at birth, which is crazy language, of course. It's insane activist language anyway, and it's taken from a Supreme Court of Canada ruling. But they are saying, basically, and then they go into, they say it's something like it's possible to believe that a person is Christian without believing in Christianity. However, it is not possible to believe a person is trans without believing that their gender identity doesn't match their sex assigned at birth. So what they're saying is lack of belief. It's compelled belief. So every Canadian should be deeply concerned by this, because in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, of course, we have freedom of belief. It's one of our fundamental rights. And with freedom of belief comes the freedom not to believe. You're free to believe whatever you want. Likewise, other people are free not to believe. That's what freedom of belief is. But trans activism, the modern trans rights movement, as the BC Human Rights Tribunal has just shown us, has taken away our right to freedom of belief, because they are saying you must believe in gender souls. And if you do not believe in gender souls, then you are denying the existence of transgender people. Therefore, you are guilty of discrimination. And if you happen to say this as like, he was a school board member and he was saying it mostly on Facebook. That's another disturbing part of it. He wasn't in a workplace saying this. He was posting on Facebook. But if you express your lack of belief in the religion of gender, you could be financially ruined.
The part you were looking for is a person does not need to believe in Christianity to accept that another person is Christian. However, to accept that a person is transgender, one must accept that their gender identity is different than their sex assigned at birth. So as a Christian, one thing that I say all the time is, people accuse me of believing in a made-up man that lives in the sky, but I find it easier for me to have faith in God than to have faith that women can have penises. Right? It's easier. But the part of the ruling that I just read, and this is the part that's insane, is basically it's okay for an atheist not to believe in Christianity, but it's not okay for me, let's say a Christian, not to believe in gender souls. So there's a massive bias between the two. So I don't care. You don't want to believe in Christ. That's fine. That's fine by me. But I don't get to choose. They get to choose if they believe in Christ or Christianity, but I don't get to say that there's only two genders and genders are no different than sex.
Yeah, and Mia, can just to add on to that before you answer, you obviously have a pretty good grasp of the legal issues here. He's basically saying A is bad, but A is not like B. But we're like, is he giving evidence for how? Because in my mind, because I remember reading that passage, and then get to his conclusion that, but that's fine, but this is not fine. In my mind, they seem like the exact same thing. Did he give any evidence or an argument for why those are not the same things? Because as I was reading it, I was like, this is a great argument for why he should not be punished, because you can do this with Christianity. So clearly you should be able to do this with another belief system. Just happens to be a secular belief system in the concept of transgender identities.
Well, first of all, the tribunal does not, they even frame talking about gender ideology, talking about this as a belief system, they frame that as discrimination. There's an insane part in there where it says there's, talking anti-trans activists. First of all, they actually use that term. Anti-trans activists,
not pro-women activists or anything,
use the term gender ideology as a veneer to hide the attacks on transgender people or something like that. They are literally saying that if you use the term gender ideology, if you talk about this as a belief system, you're doing that as a cunning way to attack transgender people, but pretend that you're not attacking them. They really, truly, there's this, I've been saying for years, Canada and certain parts of Canada, certainly like BC, it's particularly strong, but I think Canada has for the last decade or so existed in this protective bubble where it's to me, in my mind, it's a rainbow bubble. So we're in this bubble and it's just trans activists. It's just the messaging of trans activism. Absolutely nothing penetrates this bubble. So we live in this world where even the very idea that gender ideology could be a thing, it can't even enter their minds. They're not even aware that that's such a thing. Before I go any further, I'll just define what gender ideology is so that if any of your viewers don't know, they'll have it clear in their mind. Gender ideology really is, it's real. It's a belief system. And it's the belief system that tells us that what makes us men, women, boys, or girls is not the reality of our body, but a gender identity. You possess a gender identity, and it is that defines whether you are a man or a woman. That's how you end up with trans women or women, because these men have a female gender identity, and that's what makes you a woman. It's not your body. And so, of course, it's a belief system. It's actually a mad, crazy, insane belief system. And yet the BC Human Rights Tribunal, they begin from the point that gender identity is real. It exists. It's an immutable trait. Everybody possesses a gender identity, and transgender people have a mismatched one. And anything that deviates from that, they take that as completely true, unquestionable reality. So anything that deviates from that, they are saying is discrimination and veering into hate and, causing pain and suffering to the people who identify as transgender. Now, I just finished an op-ed, so hopefully it gets picked up soon. But the conclusion of my op-ed, what I'm basically saying is that's because Canada did the gender debate backwards. That's because we were one of those nations, not all nations did this, we were one of the worst ones, where we adopted and enshrined the concept of gender identity into our law before having the debate. We put this category, this protected characteristic, into law. There is no definition for it, or there are definitions that are completely incoherent and nonsensical. So we put this fictional concept with no clear definition into our law, and therefore we then handed trans activists the power to say anyone asking questions is discriminating against us. We did it backwards. So now that the debate is actually starting, and it's very much on, and nobody's going to be able to stop it, every single one of us involved in the debate is accused of hate and discrimination because we did it backwards.
And this is the next step, because what you just said there is exactly where I wanted to go with this, because I want to bring that on how it connects to Bill C-4, and then how Bill C-16 is basically the next logical step if you believe in the craziness of the trans ideology. And thank you for saying it that way. The only thing I wanted to do before we do move to my next question is I wanted to mention for the people out there, because I didn't realize that until I researched it today, but the actual, it's not a fine that they got. It's a penalty style class action that he received. So he was sued by a bunch of LGBTQ members of the Chilliwack Teachers Association, which will receive anywhere between $4,600 to $16,000 each for injury to dignity. So he was literally class action sued by the members of the Teachers Association. It's absolutely insane.
And not in a court of law, right? This is a kangaroo court, human rights tribunal. You can absolutely see how completely ideologically driven they are. Just reading the ruling, it's 140 pages long, reading the ruling almost gave me an aneurysm. It's so bad. the language is just, it's like it's written by the worst kind of trans activist. They do not even consider that there is a whole other side to this debate, and the other side to the debate that they completely ignore, willfully or otherwise, is the one that is grounded in research and developmental knowledge and actual an actual understanding of what drives people to identify as transgender. They're oblivious to all of that.
And I think, and that goes back to what you're saying about the law. It's because it's already baked into the law, so they feel comfortable just starting from this position that we should absolutely not be starting at. And just before you get to your next question there, Nico, just think of the incentives, the insane incentives this builds into the system for the money to go to the people making the complaint. Like, are you fucking, how dumb do you need to be to not see how this could be abused by anybody? Make frivolous complaints, jazz them up, and what the court's, what's important to the court, and you can make it so that they will rule a certain way and then get paid.
Well, yeah, remember, before you go to the next question, remember, I know it was Bill C-63, and before that it was C-36. It was some kind of online harms, but I don't think they called it online harms at that point. And that was, they were opening it up so that anyone could report you to the Human Rights Commission, make hate allegations against you behind a veil of anonymity. You would remain completely anonymous, and they stood to get a payout of like $20,000. Can you imagine the open season on someone like me, on all of us? We would be totally screwed.
I would be cooked.
Yeah.
Well, this is why I wanted to bring it up, starting at this story, to show where we're at today, and now go back in time and explain how this came to be and how it's about to get a lot worse if we're not careful. But before we do this, I need to thank our sponsor. This episode of The Political Orphans brought to you by Miss Cleo.
It's Miss Cleo.
It is a Miss Cleo. 100% natural, healthy dog treats made by hand right here in Canada. Everything is sourced local farms in Manitoba. So no nasty Chinese treats for your dog, because your pet deserves better, right?
Did you get your package yet?
No, not yet. But go to cleocookiesandtreats.ca, use the discount code Political Orphans, and get 20% off your entire purchase. Check out the comment section below. The information is all there for a Mr. Cleo. That was never part of my pitch. But
do you remember she used to be, she was like a psychic, a call-in psychic, and she always had these commercials at like 1 a.m. and she was this Jamaican
Cleo.
lady. It's a call, Miss Cleo. Every
time, no idea what you're talking about.
Once I found out that was the sponsor, I can't think of it any other way.
It's a North American thing, but you know what? I write those spills for the sponsors that I get. But I never thought that we would go with the Mr. Cleo. It can't stop now. We have to do it every time.
When we do it, it's Miss Cleo.
It's awesome. But, Mr. Cleo.
It's supposed to be Jamaican.
Okay. That being said, C4. So we spoke about what's going on today with this class action against Barry Neufeld, and now we need to understand where this comes from, because this didn't just appear out of thin air. This actually was somewhat sanctioned by our government. And before I do that, I wanted to show one of your posts, because you rip into one of my favorite person to rip into, Guy Poliev. Any chance I get to rip into that guy.
Yeah, that's
absolutely.
That's probably what I love to ask Mia to come back. Oh, you hate ripping on Poliev. Yeah, come on.
Ripping on Poliev, we need to take this.
Yeah.
But so a couple of days ago, I just want to make sure, on the 22nd, so 3 days ago, Pierre Poliev posted what we see on the screen here. This is insane in Aurelian. Governments and kangaroo courts now chill freedom of expression instead of fighting crimes, censoring people who dare to speak their mind, just as the BC School Board trustee who got slapped with a $750,000 fine for saying that there's only two genders. Enough is enough. We must defend the truth and free speech against these mad censors, said the guy that never spoke against Bill C9 yet, and it's been tabled for months, but I digress. So you responded, and actually I laughed so hard when I saw that. You, Mia, the little British well-behaved woman, enough is enough. But seriously, we're in this mess because the Conservative Party has been absolutely pathetic in standing up to this liberal, anti-reality, authoritarian cult. Time to make up for lost time at Pierre Poilievre. No more pussyfooting around these people. Boom! And that's the end of the comment. Absolutely love that comment. And because this is something that one of the reasons I rip into Pierre Poilievre all the time is I'm a conservative and he's supposed to be a conservative and he's supposed to stand up for what I believe in, but he's as liberal as Mark Carney. He just decides to have a blue background. That's the only difference between those two. At least, actually, Mark Carney knows he's a liberal. Poilievre thinks he's a conservative. But one of the things that people might not realize is that this all started with Bill C-4. Although Bill C-4 doesn't legally make it possible for, let's say, the BC Human Rights Tribunal to order Barry Neufeld to pay $750,000, what it does, though, is that it did change the atmosphere in Canada, essentially codifying the idea that any attempt to change or question a people's gender identity is potentially criminal.
Sure, but I'm actually going to disagree there, and I'm going to say it started somewhere else completely. I think C4 was the end point of all of the madness. And
so it started before C4 is what you're saying.
Yeah. What do you want me to do? Do you want me to start with C4 and work backwards, or go to the beginning?
Let's start
and work
at the beginning.
Forwards?
You're the smart person.
Yeah.
I'm just here to guide the conversation. And then Rob just says dumb shit in the background and makes it entertaining.
I'm just the eye candy. I'm just here to look.
We're in trouble if that's the case, bro. We're in trouble. But Mia, start from the beginning, because I believe that started with Bill C-4. But at the end of the day, you're the expert here. That's why you're here. So please challenge me. Please tell me I'm wrong and tell me where it started.
Okay, it depends how far back you want me to go. I can start with Canada. We'll just do Canada, but I need to do a little bit of background as well. So the first of all, you have to, it's confusing for a Brit, let me tell you, but I think I've got my head around the fact that you have to separate provinces from federal. So you got to separate the provinces from federal. And therefore, to track the history of how Neufeld ended up slapped with a $750,000 penalty, it begins in the Northwest Territories in 2002, which they added gender identity to their Human Rights Act in 2002. Now, let me just put it to you. How many trans-identified people do you think were living in the Northwest Territories in 2002? I'm going to guess not very many. Probably almost none. Probably almost none, right? Now,
but that comes from the idea that in their mythology there could be different genders, right? If I'm not mistaken. But even the native individuals did believe some type.
I don't even know. I think that two-spirit thing is completely made up by white activists. And then
the term two-spirit is coined by what? He was a ginger-haired queer theorist in the 1990s. But two-spirit, some kind of something in Indigenous populations has existed, and I'll tell you what that is. That is, many of these cultures had a category for extremely effeminate little boys who grew up to be extremely effeminate gay men, and they were put into a third category. That's not what trans is today. They've just co-opted that so that they can slap the 2S on there, and then they can accuse you of being racist as well as transphobic. So I don't think that's what it was. I'll tell you why I think they started in the Northwest Territories. It's because this was Egal Canada, the big group that is responsible for all of this. Egal Canada were pivotal in it. And I think, so they concocted this pseudo-legal concept of gender identity in Texas in the 1990s. And they're just kind of creating these documents that are not legally binding, and they're embedding gender identity and bringing it into existence. Prior to that, it was just a psychological theory. So they've got this going on in the 1990s in Texas and in the US. And then Canada is the first place where it gets officially into a legal system. It gets into they get it into the Human Rights Code of the Northwest Territories. Now, I think they chose such a remote location because, no offense if you've got any viewers in the Northwest Territories, but who cares about the Northwest Territories? There's no scrutiny.
Yeah.
They can embed it into a Human Rights Act without anybody noticing. It's like a practice run on the one hand, and it also, then it exists. Then they can go for one of the bigger provinces. Ontario was next, but look, Northwest Territories has already done it.
Look, are they more progressive than you? Right. Like, and it works.
But okay, I could go on about this for a long time. So if I'm going on too much, tell me. But there's a really interesting thing that happened. So that was 2002. That's a long time ago. The people with a gal who did that, there were two very important people, John Fisher and Kim Vance, I think the name is. These two then leave a gal right after they get it embedded into the Northwest Territories. They move to Geneva. They set up this NGO that promotes SOGI, the thing that Barry Neufeld ended up being put on trial for. They promote that internationally. Then they embed. They set up a very pivotal meeting in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. It produces the Yogyakarta Principles. This is when gender identity really becomes a legal concept that nations all over the world can then use. They all look to Yogyakarta, these principles, on how to draw up their legal frameworks. Yogyakarta was pivotal. That was Canadians who did that, who set the whole thing up. Then Ontario comes along and, they can point to the Northwest Territories. Look, we've already put it in the Northwest Territories. We just need to, and then look at Yogyakarta Principles. This is what these people are saying, and they're all experts and they know what they're talking about. So then Ontario copies Yogyakarta, puts gender identity into its provincial human rights code, and then each province just follows suit. And each one is looking to Northwest Territories, to Ontario, to BC. And everybody is just citing each other or copy pasting each other. And nobody at any point stops to ask, wait a minute, does this even exist?
Yeah, where's the source material for this?
And what is it? First of all, like, I think, what is gender identity?
We don't even know what it is.
They can't even define it. There's no biological marker. There's no test. There's no objective measure. It's just this self-declared gender soul with no definition whatsoever that is being embedded into all of the provincial human rights codes. So that's how we got here. Hang on.
It definitely lays to waste the claim that this is some organic movement, right? This was designed and implemented from the ground up by actual activists with a plan in mind.
Oh, no question. I mean, so the thing about look at all the other civil rights movements in history. They were fought over decades, centuries for some, but they were fought over many, many decades, grassroots, building up, building support, open debate, persuasion, and then look at trans rights. It appears out of nowhere. Do you remember any debate about getting gender identity into the Ontario Human Rights Code in 2012? Of course not. There was no debate. They're just embedding this completely insane concept that they pulled out of thin air that has no definition into the human rights codes. And there's even, so the woman who put it in Ontario, this is a really interesting part. Her name was Sherry DeNovo, NDP, of course, NDP, MPP, Sherry DeNovo. She tables this private member's bill. I think it's like the fourth or fifth time they've tried to push gender identity into the Human Rights Code, and they failed. I think it's the third or fourth time that they succeed. She wrote a memoir in 2021 where she talks about what that period was like. And she says very clearly, she says, this bill changed the entire way that the province did business, from identity cards, spaces, prisons, but nobody knew what they were supporting. She says, I'm glad that no one looked too closely. They pushed it into law without anybody even looking at what they were doing or what the impact would have. But then, because each province just copies the other and it just spreads, like a mold across the nation, that'll get me in trouble, I bet. And then C16 comes along. So everybody talks about C16, which was the amendment to the the Federal Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code.
What
That
year
came
is this?
along 2017.
Okay.
All of the debating was going on in 2016, and then it makes it into our federal legal system in 2017. And there was a lot of debate going on around this. Now that is, they put gender identity in as a protected grounds, so you can't discriminate against people in federal services, so in prisons, in federal employment. It's a federal bill. But what really most people missed, I think, at the time was the C16. They just shrugged it off. They're just like, well, it's in all of the provincial human rights codes. It's already embedded all the way across the country. So we're just doing a kind of, administrative, bureaucratic little update to bring the federal law in line with all the provinces. But nobody understood, who was writing the law, that all of the provinces had put this crazy concept into law without any scrutiny, without any analysis, and without any definition that makes any sense. And now here we are, where we can't even say that women are female. We can't say that it's wrong to chop body parts off teenage girls. We can't even state basic facts about human existence because of the very dedicated and structured and long game approach that trans activists played in creating this new reality.
So where does Bill C4 connect into this? Because Bill C16, it's kind of ironic that you're bringing up Bill C16 back from 2017 when there's a new Bill C16 that were tabled. So it's kind of, they're doing it on purpose. If you pay attention, you'll notice those things. We'll talk about that next. But where does Bill C4, because this is a big deal for a lot of conservatives like me out there, because people always hear, oh yeah, but Pierre Poilievre voted in favor of Bill C4. I want to correct that. That is incorrect. If you want to be really keen on words, he didn't vote for Bill C4. It was passed anonymous. It was passed without any it was passed without debate. There's a motion.
Voice motion.
100%. There was a motion in the House on December 1st, 2021 that just allowed the bill to pass without a recorded vote. And it is Conservative MP Rob Moore that introduced a motion to bypass the usual debate in committee stages to pass the bill immediately. Pierre Poilievre did not vote for it. He was in favor. He voted yes for the motion to expedite everything without debate. So in my mind, it's even worse. But how does Bill C4 connect with what you're talking about, Bill C16 from 8 years ago, and what happened in 2002 in the Northwest Territories?
Well, it connects in the sense that it's one more piece of legislation with this made-up concept of gender identity thrust in there. Now, Bill C4 has a slightly less convoluted history. This is, so conversion therapy ban. We talked about this briefly last time. It's a so-called conversion therapy ban. It's supposed to make it illegal to perform conversion therapy on homosexual people to make them straight, and on supposedly transgender people to make them cisgender, which is not a real word, it's a fake word. So C4, before that was C6. And before it was C6, it was, I believe it was C8. I'm not sure. It was tabled 3 times. And what happened, it's awful. It's actually horrendous what they did. So there was a huge debate around it when it was C6. And this was because the gender debate was very weak at the time in Canada. The opposition was quite weak, but it was growing. And there were enough people who looked at this bill and saw that the gender part of it, I mean, nobody cares. Like there is a slight issue with the conversion therapy for homosexuals, in the sense that, some adults who are gay and do not wish to live that way felt that they should have the right to seek out some kind of therapeutic support if that's what they wanted. They're adults, and this prevents that. And there was opposition there. Most of the opposition was gender identity. So again, fictional concept. It doesn't mean anything, and we are getting it so that I read it out last time. I think I have it somewhere here, where one of the lines, it's an amendment to the criminal code where it is conversion therapy to repress a person's non-cisgender gender identity, right? Non-cisgender. They don't even say transgender. They say non-cisgender gender identity. So the problem, obviously, with this one is, first of all, when it was C6, half of the Conservatives voted against it, or approximately half. And I know why they did, because I actually know the person who spent an awful lot of time getting together a meeting and telling the actual Conservative Party what this meant, what gender identity, what this concept of gender identity being imposed upon children really means, the harm, the social contagion, the kids being confused, the gender non-conforming kids, and you tell them that they have a mismatched gender soul and they need body parts chopped off. Like, somebody actually took the time to get the Conservative Party to listen to the entire other side of the gender debate. And then half of them voted against it. And then, I don't know, an election must have been called or something. And this one dies on the table, comes back as C4. And C4, they got some tiny little clause in there. Like, the little clause really bugs me because some people considered it to be a win. And I think it's pathetic. There was an exclusion section where it's not a criminal offense to do talk therapy to help a young person explore their gender identity. And this is the part that really bugs me. As long as you are not prioritizing cisgender identity over any other, or you're not prioritizing a certain identity. Now, the reason that, like, I understand that that's, you did get some kind of compromise there, but the reason that it bugs me is because it's basically saying these two identities are equal. The identity where you accept yourself, you come to terms and you reconcile with your body, and you do not want body parts chopped off, and you do not want to be a lifelong medical patient, is exactly the same as this one over here, where you have your penis chopped off and your breasts chopped off and your endocrine system destroyed with powerful drugs. These two are the same thing, and you cannot, in a therapeutic setting, prioritize one over the other. That's completely insane. But that comes back to this whole nonsense pretending that gender identity is a real thing, pretending that some people have these innate gender essences within them and there's nothing you can do about them. They're not changeable in any way. And so the Conservatives, I don't know if it was because of that little exclusion thing that is totally rubbish and nonsense, or whether they just gave up. I suspect they just gave up. They could see that it was Canada as a nation was not ready for this debate. It was unpopular, and I can see why it would be unpopular, because this was 2021. The mainstream media coverage of the gender issue then, I mean, it's still pretty atrocious now. In fact, it's absolutely atrocious now, but then it was even worse. So of course, the average Canadian, if they're getting all of their news and information from CBC, CTV, whatever, they're going to think that the Conservatives are a bunch of transphobic bigots and not vote for them. So instead of taking on the issue, thrusting it to the forefront of their messaging, and themselves educating the public on what is actually happening to these kids in gender clinics, they just gave up. Unanimous, passed it. And then, I'm sure we all remember when they were cheering, they all crossed the floor and they're shaking hands and there's rainbow flags. And I just thought, you guys have no clue what you've just done. But then at the time I was like, you've got no idea what you've just done. But then I realized, actually, at least half of you do know what you've just done. You know that this is a form of conversion therapy for gay adolescents. You know that you've just passed a bill that makes conversion therapy the only option in gender clinics, and now you're all cheering. Yep, there they are. Oh, they're all wearing masks. Yep.
Yeah.
That's why I'm showing it, because they're wearing masks, and even this bald-headed guy there is wearing a scarf that's obviously a rainbow.
Right.
Yeah. And that's a great point about this whole conversion therapy thing. Is it entirely depends on your perspective, because you can just as easily make the case that their version of gender affirming care is itself conversion therapy, because
Yeah.
if we go by their
100%.
logic, they are turning a young gay man into a straight woman. How is that not conversion therapy of his homosexual identity?
And I've spoken to many gay men about this, and lesbians, but more the gay men, who tell me that they see what's happening in gender clinics as being worse than the old-fashioned conversion therapy, because the old-fashioned one, it certainly wasn't great. I'm not saying we should bring it back or anything. It was terrible, but a lot of it was psychological and shame, based on inducing shame and trying to force the man to be attracted to women. This is, you are actually chopping off this man's penis. I know young gay men in their 20s who don't have penises because they grew up in this mad era where they were really, really effeminate in their adolescence, and they were told that made them girls. They took puberty blockers, they took estrogen, and then they had their penises chopped off, and now they're in their 20s, and they've got to go their whole lives living this way. That's way worse than conversion therapy back in the day, right?
I'm sure you're probably talking about at least one of them, Richie Heron, who's quite well known on
I
X.
love Richie.
Richie's great, and anyone in this debate will have interacted with him, and he's a great guy. And just imagine this for a second: he's a young gay man in his early 20s, and his penis was cut off, but he no longer subscribes to the belief system that induced him to do that. He knows it was a lie. He knows it was pushed on him, and he has to somehow live with that for the rest of his life, with no cock and no balls. It is man-made horrors beyond our comprehension.
It is, right? I'm speaking in DC in a couple of weeks, and Richie will be there. I get to meet him in person. I've spoken to him many times online, but his story is incredible. There's things that people don't understand and don't think about, and it is very difficult to think about because it's so gruesome and so ghastly. But he will talk about the fact that he has to dilate this wound. It's an inverted penis, and it's a wound, and if he doesn't dilate it, the body closes up. Yep. So he has to dilate for the rest of his life, but he doesn't identify as a woman anymore. And they screwed it up completely. Like, he was never able to even have sex as a woman. It was not functional. I tell you, something that really bugs me: these gender surgeons, when some of them, when they're talking about performing this penile inversion, like they chop the penis off and they invert it, they will sometimes say that they are creating a fully functional vagina. And you know what they mean by fully functional? They mean can be penetrated.
It can be fucked. And that's right. That's all they care about.
Them, that's what women are, I guess, because I've pushed 3 babies out of mine, and I'm pretty sure no man could ever do that out of his inverted penis.
Insane. Just so insane.
You mentioned something that I find very interesting. Again, going back to the conservatives that are supposed to be fighting this if they're conservatives. But you mentioned that they got a tiny little piece into Bill C-4, and that's enough to not have the debate. Canada's not ready, but we got to win. And Bill C-9 is the same thing. The hate speech bill is the exact same thing. You have Layton right now, a conservative MP, that's fighting for the religion. And I'm like, hey, asshole, how about the definition of hate speech that's being put in there? I'm a Christian, but I'm used to people hating on Christians. It's fine. People don't like it. Don't care. It's not going to stop me from sleeping. But why? They're trying to get that tiny little win by protecting the religion of everybody, when they're not addressing the real problem in Bill C-9, saying the definition of hate is more than disdain. Yeah. This is your parameter,
legal definition
that we're going to put in the criminal code. So you're basically changing Canada as we know it, but nobody over there, Pierre Poilievre, is complaining, oh, this is Aurelian. Hey, ass, you never talked about Bill C-9. Never mentioned a fucking word how dangerous that bill is, and you voted for a motion that allowed Bill C-4 to pass. No consequences, and people still think he's a conservative. And I want this to me. So we talked about what's going on right now with a $750,000 fine. You took us back to 2002 when people had glazed hair. Do you remember that? They have little yellow hair.
Frosted tips.
Frosted tips. Yeah.
Frosted tips, brother.
You brought us back to the
I
frosted
don't remember
tips.
that.
Yeah, no.
Oh, as you can tell, hair is very important to me.
Yeah,
But the frosted tips, the Justin Timberlakes of this world.
yeah.
And the next step, I want to take the last remaining minutes to talk about what's coming, like Bill C-16, that's coming, that's been tabled, so that we can kind of show we see the present, we have an understanding of how the hell we got here, and now we should have a bit of an understanding as to where the fuck we're going, because it ain't looking any better.
Okay, what is C-16? I don't think I know.
But before we get there, I want to say to the listeners that on March 1st, I'm launching a private community for the people of the political orphans. For those who know what's wrong and agree that the last thing we need is more political slogans and talking points, the subject of today being one of them. But I want to stop talking about the problems, and I want us to start building on solutions, because there's three types of people in this life: people that talk about other people that talk about problems, and people that find solutions. I want to create a group that is for people that will find solutions. We need to be able to have conversations like the one that we're having today, but we need to find ways to take that and turn it into serious solutions that we can apply in the real world. So this will be a citizen-led movement to rebuild Canada into the country our kids deserve. March 1st, I'm just talking about it, but this is coming. What's up?
Nice. Just to Mia, to give you a bit of context, C-16. So that's our hate speech bill.
No, it is not.
Oh,
no,
sorry.
it is not.
C9 is the hate speech.
Oh, that's right. That's
why we don't let. That's why we don't let Rob talk about bills. He's just there because we need a liberal. Bill C9 is the Hate Speech Act. Bill C-16 is the new one that was tabled back in December last year. It is called the Protecting Victims Act, and it is pushed as a bill the Liberal government introduced. It's being sold as tackling gender-based violence, controlling behavior, and strengthening child protection. They're basically saying we're going to go after predators. But one of the things that it makes very clear is that gender-based violence, in a world where gender can be defined by any emotion that you want, and that violence is anything you say online that hurts people's feelings, the thing that Bill C-16 does that is absolutely insane is that it calls on the definition of Bill C-9 of hate speech. So if you start paying attention to those bills like the C2, C8, C9, C12, C16, and the new Bill C-63 when it's going to be retabled, they all call on each other. They're all interconnected instead of a big fuck
kind of like what you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, but that's exactly my point. So what you were describing that happened in the Northwest Territories and then Ontario is like, hey, hold my beer. We need to do this too. This is what's happening right now. And Bill C-16 is the Protecting Victims Act. So if you've never looked into it, I would highly suggest that you look into it, because it is literally sold as gender-based violence, to tackle gender-based violence, and it calls on Bill C-9's definition of hate speech that modifies the criminal code into saying that hate is anything worse or worse than disdain, or stronger than disdain. Yeah,
that's a great example of why these bills are so insidious, right? Because once they get implanted into the system, they spread out and they'll infect other bills. Bills will now refer to them on their, it's all fruit of the poisonous tree, right? You're getting, everything's rotten because it's sourced from this rotten source material.
But like you were saying, the other thing, just before I pass it to you, is that they are not putting it into one single bill. They're doing it on purpose. They have, like, as a sales engineer that deconstructed solutions for 10 to 20 years, that's all I did. Customers said, I want this. I'd sit down and I'd figure out how do I get to what they need in the time span that they're giving me with an amount of money that's set. How do I make that happen? And I look at what they're doing. Their objective is to turn Canada into the UK, where you can't say that rape gangs are actually raping women because that would be racist, and then you're going to get arrested and you might get thrown to jail because you called the guy that sexually abused you a slur word in a private conversation with your friend, and now you're looking at jail time. But this is where we're going, and looking at how they're all interconnected. If you're not paying it, it's very easy if you're not paying attention to not see what's actually going on.
Yeah, and my point is always, it is very difficult to repeal. Once something is in law, it's extremely difficult ever to repeal it, which is why, but then there's so much apathy. People don't follow it. I mean, I confess I didn't even know about this C-16, so I can't really comment on it because I haven't read it. I will say with Bill C-9, it sounds like they're doing something similar as what they did with Bill C-9, because Bill C-9 had the hate speech component, did it not? But then did it not also have protecting children from child predators online or something like that? The two things
and that makes
smushed together.
Yeah.
Well, because
that's
everybody
Bill
went
C-16.
Wasn't that C-9?
No, the portion you're talking about is Bill C-16. There's a bit in Bill C-8 about that, but it's mostly from Bill C-63.
They often use
I might be talking about 63. I think I'm talking about the online harms.
It's a common technique.
Yep.
But that's what we were talking about last time. It is this technique. Tie it to something that everyone supports. So everyone does want to protect children from child predators online. So you put that there, and then you put something really, really unpopular in there with it, and then nobody wants to oppose it because then it means that they don't care about children being preyed on online. It's a classic tactic. But no, I'm not familiar with these, so I don't think I can comment.
But you basically made my point, though. Is just by illustrating how it started with Northwest Territory, then Ontario came in, and all the other province, like Rob was saying, oh, they're saying this, so they're just echo chamber passing it into law, like this has been proven because Northwest Territory did it, Ontario did it, so we have to do it too, obviously.
And then you zoom out, and that happens at the international level. Then the UK says, well, Canada did it.
I know.
And Australia says, well, we've got to do it too, right?
Well, and I will say, I think in my mind, there are two levels to that. And that is, on the one hand, you've got the activists who have created this whole new reality, and they want to embed it into legal frameworks all around the world. They want to create their new reality. So those are the activists. And then you've got, to me, I think of the politicians as the useful idiots. They just come along and they're swept up in the political, moral enthusiasm of the era, and they think it makes them look like good people to pass this bill. Look how tolerant and progressive we are. And so they do what the activists tell them without understanding that the activists have a very clear plan, and that is to embed this concept into law all across the country. So there's two levels to it. There are the people who actually know what they're doing and are deliberately doing it, and then there are the politicians who are just the useful idiots who go along with it.
Yeah.
If you look at Bill C-16, gender-based violence is used 7 times, and it is literally a few.
Well, who could oppose gender-based violence, right?
No, but they sell it. If you go from the beginning,
I'm not wearing my glasses though.
An act to amend certain acts in relation to criminal and correctional matters, child protection, obviously, gender-based violence, delays, and other measures. This is the first page of Bill C-16, and it is to put a component of hate into the criminal code, which calls on Bill C-9, but a hate-based violence, like the murder is motivated by hate. Like, I've never heard of a murder that was done with love. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, how stupid are we here? I love you so much that I'm murdering you right now. Like, it makes no sense. No sense at all.
I mean, I push back a little bit on that. I think there is a certain type of murder, is it not? But that's more, it's not love, it's possessive. It's a possessive
Sure.
jealousy. Like the man may think he's in love, but he's actually just got some kind of possessive.
We got men
Evaluated.
thinking they're women, so
Yeah.
this is as far-fetched as that is, but I didn't invite you to look into this and tell me what you think. Reach out to me afterwards, because this is they're selling the idea of let's protect the children. You know that Simpson character? But please think about the children. And this is exactly what they're doing. They're passing gender-based ideology, because once you understand that gender-based is not just men and women, that means any violence done to people with serious mental illnesses is now hate.
Well, and I mean,
I mean, violence is violence. Why does it need another category?
Yeah, that's a great point too. You know what I mean? Or even if you want to do sex-based laws against sex-based violence, you know, that might even be a different thing. But
just violence, violence, like being violent towards another human being, is already
in and of
criminal.
itself.
Why do we need another layer to it?
I agree with that completely.
Unless we're
The funniest
talking
part
kind of
about that,
words of violence, type violence.
the funny part about gender-based violence is if you look at couples, the highest, the couples that are more at risk of violence are lesbians. The ones that are least at risk are homosexuals. I'm just saying. Partner violence is the highest with lesbians as per statistics and the lowest with homosexuals. I'm just saying. And when they were presenting this bill, they were clearly making it about men attacking women. That's how they're making it sound. And I find it interesting that if you look at studies, there's almost, you're talking a few percentage difference between men that are in a violent relationship with a woman and women that are in a violent relationship with men. It's just men don't talk about it because that's not okay. You can't tell that I'm 230 pounds, my 120-pound wife just hit me. But how many times just in movies you see a woman literally smack a guy in the face because he said something that's not acceptable to her? Can you imagine if my wife said something to me and I just punch her? That even the ideology behind. But
I
just
look
look around you.
just as you're talking, I just kind of quickly Google that and take this for what it's worth because it's just the AI response. But yeah, it says research that women in same-sex relationships experience intimate partner violence at high rates, between 44 and 67%.
I'm genuinely shocked by that.
Most people don't know this, but I'm used to debating feminists. So
that's an interesting statistic. Yeah.
But that doesn't mean anything. Don't worry about it. That's just a coincidence.
Well, I mean,
data doesn't matter. It's a joke, bro.
That's
sarcasm.
Really strange, though, because women do not have the same propensity to violence. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I actually, a very dear friend of mine was abused by his wife, and what was terrible about that was, well, it's obviously awful anyway, but it is the strength imbalance. So she was physically abusive and he absolutely could not defend himself, because if he even defended himself, he would then be accused of being violent towards her and then he would lose the kids. So I understand that's really a thing. The lesbian one is shocking.
It is shocking, right? And because as you say, I mean, I think most people understand that, yes, women can be violent, but I think it's understood that men can be more violent. But as we're talking about this, you know, I had a thought, and again, you know, no one crucify me. I'm just throwing this out there. But there's two aspects to a report of domestic violence. There's the violence, and then there's the report of it. And perhaps women, as in lesbian relationships, are just reporting it more often. Or maybe they're seeing violence where it isn't actually there and reporting that as violence. Again, I don't have any deeper opinion beyond that. It's just a thought that popped into my head. I'm not saying that women are likely to falsely report domestic violence, but I'm just, you know, it's a plausible solution to the question of, that's weird because women aren't that violent.
You can add another aspect to this.
Yeah.
But you need to add another aspect to this that people don't like to talk about. But a lot of lesbians come from a very violent background as they were abused. This is something just like transgenders. Often there's a lot of them that come from a messed up background. So maybe that's all it is because they come from a place that might have seen more violence, so they're more prone to it. The other thing to consider too is the difference in violence, because right now I did not say physical violence. I said partner violence. There's a difference. Men seem they're normally more physical. They will do something physical. Women play the psychological game. And the best way to illustrate that is, remember high school. Boys will bully boys physically, will stuff them in corner. They'll stuff them. They'll beat them up. Women will destroy your psyche for years so that you no longer want to appear in other words, real life. But that's the big difference. Like if you look psychologically wise,
back in high school.
No, not at all. I was bullied
back in high school. No, no, you were the one in the locker.
I was the one in the locker. Yeah. That's why I learned martial arts, and that's why I started to fight, because I did not know how to defend myself. But if you look at the different type of violence, you look at the background of these women as well.
I have to look into this, and I'm not. Are we sure that lesbians have been abused? Like I know on the trans issue, I've looked into that extensively, and there's definitely, like, the CAS report found that the kids that went through the JIDS clinic in London, they did have a higher than normal rate of adverse child events, and a much higher than normal rate of living with a parent who was a registered sex offender. But we're still talking, you know, I think it was under 3% of them, but that's astronomically high compared to the number of registered sex offenders there are. So there is a correlation there. But I think when we're talking trauma in trans, it can be the trauma of being bullied. It can be the trauma of divorced parents or a broken home or the moving around and stuff. So a lot of things are lumped into the label of trauma, and it's not always abusive or sexual violence. Sure. As for lesbians, I can't comment. I thought that was an old myth.
I just know what came up when I Googled it first. It said similar or higher rates in heterosexual women. Some studies showing roughly 45% to 67% of lesbian bisexual women experience IPV, have experienced IPV in their relationships. It's an interesting statistic, and I would have to look more into the source material of that as well.
You're not going to find it. I've looked into it, and unfortunately, there's not a lot of data that will. You have to kind of look at the psychological.
It gives some links to the data they're using.
No, there's data out there, but they never push the real studies over 100 years, for example, to try to analyze, because how long have lesbians really getting married has been normalized, let's say, the 80s, the 70s. So there's not that much data, but there's something that seems to indicate trauma. And I'm not saying they're lesbians because they've been traumatized, although you could argue that if you look at trans, a lot of them, like we were talking, I think it was yesterday, Rob, that some of them are not necessarily fit to take right decisions. Like they are. What's the two categories? I'm drawing a blank right now. You called them out yesterday when we were talking about the man in the prison that's now a woman, but that's caused multiple sexual assaults and want to be transferred to a woman's prison now. You went on a rant for like almost 5 minutes, and you were referring to certain state. It's the mental. I don't know that they're.
Like state of mind as you commit a crime?
No, not the state of mind. The people that are more prone, they're most susceptible to believing.
I was talking about autistic people are more susceptible to.
There you go. Thank you.
That there's something wrong with their body.
Autism. Thank you. Right. That's the word I was looking for. So autism. So you know that there's a correlation when you start looking at trends, that there is a pattern. I'm not saying that every single one of them is, right?
No question. Of course, there's a strong correlation with autism. And I think that's not even that complicated. We've spent a long time talking about it, but it's not even that complicated. So first of all, autistic individuals or people on the autism spectrum tend to be somewhat gender nonconforming. They have social difficulties. They don't quite fit in. They're lonely. They're isolated. That is every risk factor for falling into this trans movement. And you know, because of trans identity, it's enticing for two reasons. One, it's an explanation for why you don't fit in and why you're socially awkward. It's because you're trans. That's enticing for a kid who doesn't really understand why they're the weird kid. But it also comes with the tantalizing promise of a cure. Okay, I'm trans and all I need to do is follow this medical pathway and my life will be amazing and wonderful and I'll be popular. And then there's a third layer to it, and that is the isolated adolescent who does not fit in, identifies as trans and finds themselves in a community that accepts them and is happy to have them, and they found their tribe, and so it all feels really real. And autistic people on the autism spectrum have a tendency to hyperfixate on one particular issue, and once they're hyperfixated on it, you cannot distract them from it. And if that fixation happens to be trans ideology or gender and this medical treatment, then you've got very little chance of getting them off course. So that's autism. And then all of the other little comorbidities that we have going on, the trauma and the bullying and the everything, again, trans is just, the tantalizing promise of an escape. You can transition to be someone else. You can cast off that old shameful self who had no friends, who was really, awkward and shy, and you can become someone new. And that new person is going to be accepted and celebrated, and all your teachers are going to applaud, and everybody's going to, validate your identity and be really kind to you. So there's a promise of a better life if you identify as transgender, that for these kids who are in a really dark place in adolescence and they don't know why they're hurting so much, you can see why they're being drawn in. But the reason why the reason why I think it's not like homosexuality is because your sexuality, you can't really control it. Once you hit puberty and you have certain desires, you can't control who you're attracted to. And so if you happen to be attracted to members of the same sex, you may be very uncomfortable with that. And that's another reason why some of them will identify as trans. They're escaping their homosexuality, but it's instinctive. It's something you have no control over. And once somebody once somebody's sexuality develops, it very rarely changes. I would argue it never changes, and people were just in denial before. But if you come out as gay when you're 16, 17, and you remain homosexual into being a fully grown adult, you're not going to detransition from being gay and switch to being heterosexual. It's fixed. You can't control it. It's something within you. So the two things are very different. And trans is just,
I'll push back on you like you've pushed back on me today. Okay. I'm very happy this is happening. So as per the NIH, the National Institute of Health, study shows that LGBTQ individuals are 1.6 to 4 times more likely to report childhood abuse, including sexual, emotional, and physical abuse, as well as household dysfunctions. Higher prevalence. One study found that 83% of LGBTQ individuals reported at least one adverse childhood experience. Specific abuse rates. Lesbians and bisexual women are roughly twice as likely to report childhood maltreatment, 27.6 to 30.5%, compared to heterosexual women at 13.1.
What's the maltreatment, though? What are we talking about? What is that? Because I will say, here's the other thing that you've got to understand. Like, we still don't tolerate extreme gender nonconformity very well. And so if you're a tomboy, extremely masculine, you may have parents who are not tolerant of that. If you're an effeminate boy destined to grow up to be a gay man, you may not have parents who can tolerate that. That's another way that these kids end up being trans, is that their parents don't want the effeminate little boy, so they trans him. So what kind of adverse
I'm not saying I have
it?
Mia, I'm not saying I have the answers. All I'm saying is there's a correlation. There's data out there. But I think
regardless, once it's set, it does not change. Once a child hits puberty, there's no changing, right?
Well, I interviewed Dr. Paul McHugh, who he is, the man who shut down John Money's gender clinic in 1979, like a total legend. He's 94 when I interviewed him. And he has this thing where he says, you shouldn't be calling anyone, gay, straight, whatever, until they're 21. Give everyone time to experiment, settle into their identities. He obviously doesn't think you should call any of these kids trans. He shut down John Money, the first gender clinic. But give people time to experiment and settle in. But once you settle in, you're fixed.
Yeah,
and you have no control over
and
it.
I think most people, many gay adults will definitely say they felt that they kind of knew it all along. But I definitely sort of agree with the idea, just as a broad policy, that just leave people alone until they're 20, 21. Let them figure it out for themselves.
Yeah.
No matter what the subject is, actually. As much as not just trans, not just your sexual preference, but it's...
You don't need to tell people who they are.
Did you guys see, did you see, I did a tweet the other day because we were talking, there was a lot of talk about fertility because there was supposed to be a puberty blocker trial launched by the NHS in England, and they were offering 10-year-olds fertility preservation.
That's insane.
And that's so another insane. Huge thing, right? Because my baby fever didn't hit until I was 30. And when I was 28, I absolutely did not want to have children. 29, pretty much, still absolutely did not want to have children. And then I hit 30 and I needed to have a baby instantly. I had to have a baby right away. And then I had 3 children and I was a stay-at-home mother. So the very idea, it's like you can't make that decision at 21 either. Yes. I don't think anyone could make that decision, to be honest. Like maybe in your 40s.
It's wild, right? The fact that they're even talking about this, and that alone wasn't enough to make them think. Like, if you're even asking the question, okay, should we be telling these kids or pushing these kids to take to freeze their eggs? Should we freeze this 10-year-old's eggs? That alone should be evidence that you've gone too far.
Right. I've always thought, like what goes through the surgeon's mind when there's a 16-year-old girl out on the operating table and he's about to chop off her healthy breast. I don't think it's money. I really don't think. I think that surgeon is so ideologically captured that he sees a boy on the operating table and he thinks
that's a dangerous
group of people. Boy. But I just think when you can see her right there and you're just about to do this to her, does it ever flicker into your mind, my God, I'm a monster. What am I doing? I dated
for years. I dated an anesthesiologist that worked. Obviously, she's in Canada, so she worked for the public sector. She worked for the children's, actually, in Montreal, and she also did some private work. And she worked for one of those clinics. That was years ago. She could not give two fucking shit about the ideology. It just paid extremely fucking well. She could not give two shits
I'm
about
sure
the
there's
ideology.
like that Irish one. That Irish one, the
Sive Gallagher. That one belongs in prison.
Yeah, and I think she's mostly caring about the money. But there are definitely people who...
She's a genuine psychopath. I think there are the ideologically driven ones who think that they are saving the lives of trans kids.
In some ways, those are more dangerous.
Psychopaths. Yeah, I think the ones who genuinely think they're saving trans kids are more dangerous because if you don't know, Nico, who this woman is, like she's Irish, but she was in the US, this surgeon, and she's a TikTok celebrity, and she would do these TikTok videos about, she would call it yeet the teats. That's what she would call medically unnecessary bilateral mastectomy. She gave it a fun, quirky name, yeet the teats. And she would make all of these TikTok videos for her hundreds of thousands of teenage followers, with quirky music, and she's all dolled up and she's dancing around talking about yeeting the teats and selling her ghoulish, ghastly services to these vulnerable kids online who are in the depths of misery and think that having their breast chopped off is going to make their life magical and wonderful. I think she belongs in prison.
Almost certainly victims of childhood sexual assault, which is heavily overrepresented among young teenage girls. I think as high as 80%
but this is where
report some version of sexual abuse somewhere.
The trauma.
But this is where I disagree with you guys, because you guys seem to believe that it's worse if they believe that they're doing good. I think it's way worse if they know that what they're doing is not good, because I could potentially understand to a certain extent that somebody is really a believer, because there are believers out there
maybe
that
not
really
good,
believe
but just more dangerous.
No, I think you've
but
misunderstood though. What I'm saying is I think it's worse, first of all, because most of them I think are the true believers. They believe that they're saving the lives of trans kids, so-called. But the problem is that makes it more difficult to see that they're just outright committing crimes, because they look like normal good people, and they look like they're they're really genuinely, they care about these kids and they really want to help them. And so the average person can be duped, and has clearly been duped for years, into thinking that this is real medicine and these are, they are helping these kids. Whereas I think Sive Gallagher, that TikTok surgeon, it's so clear to me that this is just like, to me, she looks evil. I think like she actually looks like a psychopath, because she's posing with these girls with their scars, and they've got self-harm scars on their arms, and that doesn't seem to bother her at all. And I think it's just much easier to spot that this is a terrible crime when she's doing it, compared to the ones who are just genuinely, they believe that they're helping.
That's a good point.
We're gonna have to disagree, or else we're gonna have to go down the philosophical route of what's not. I believe it's not as bad. As much as I really dislike those individuals to believe what they believe, that they can be indoctrinated that much without ever questioning it, that's dangerous. But somebody that knows that what they're doing is wrong, they just do it because there's money, that's a sociopath / psychopath right there. But that's the world we idolize now, right?
I think we agree, but I just think the others are more dangerous because you can't spot them as easily. The evil one committing a terrible crime, knowingly committing a crime, yeah, that's absolutely horrendous. But they're easier to spot. From
the perspective of trying to stop the ideology.
The only reason they're harder to stop is because we're not talking about it.
That's why I spend every waking moment talking about it.
But that's my point. Like I grew up being told that we can't talk about three things. We can't talk about money, we can't talk about politics, and we can't talk about religion. Yet every single person out there has an opinion on it. Those are the three things we all have an opinion on, agree, disagree. And this is one of them. Not being able to talk about the trans ideology and how dangerous that is, and how it's going to be seen as the most insane medical part of our history. Like, this is absolutely insanity what's happening, and most people don't realize those are little girls. They're it's really the little girls it's not a big dude in a dress. That person, I'll knock him out and he'll never do it again. But that little girl that really believes that's been indoctrinated to believe that there's something physically and mentally wrong with her, she'll probably never get over it. That's why I was saying earlier that, there's the two types of bullying. I'd much rather be bullied by a man, because my bones will heal. My scars, I'll forget the pain that's associated with those scars. But feminine type of violence is something that is traumatic. And there's a good reason those people never get over it. Like, you'll learn to live with the consequences of your actions, but you'll never stop thinking about it.
Yeah, I have a teenage daughter, so I'm being reminded of what it is to be in high school with a bunch of horrible teenage girls. But I will say, I guess maybe it's my final point if we're going to wrap up soon, but I do truly believe, like what you just said, Nico, it's not just the worst medical scandal that has ever happened in all of history. It is one of the most insane moments in human history. If you've ever, when I was a kid, when I used to love history and I would read about the Salem witch trials, and I used to think, what was it like to live through something so crazy? We're living through it. We're living through that kind of moment right now. This is as mad as the Salem witch trials. An entire society has completely lost their minds, believes in witches, and is on a witch hunt. But we're there. This is what it is. So I don't feel we're kind of, I don't know. We're kind of emerging from it, I think. But are we in Canada? The rest of the world, I think, is emerging from it.
There are signs
Canada.
Of it, and then something happens like this ridiculous $250,000 penalty that we brought you on to talk about in the first place.
Well,
Three quarters of a million. Yes, sorry. And then you're like, oh, okay, maybe we're not doing the progress that we thought.
Well, institutionally, we're not because of that and all of the pig-headed, and they won't listen to anything at the elite level. But you can feel the change in Canada.
Yes.
You must be able to feel, right?
For sure.
The ordinary people are emerging from this. So I still, even though it's completely mental, I still feel hopeful that we're getting there.
I feel the same.
Yet our conservatives still don't have the balls to talk about it. Any chance I get to rep into them, I will.
Yeah. Yeah. That was great.
Thanks for coming on the show, Maya, again. Always appreciate
Always a pleasure.
Lovely to
your
see you both.
experience and knowledge. Yep. Really happy you joined. We'll do it again.
Yeah.
Read Bill C-16 and let me know what you think of Bill C-16.
Will do.
Because that is, you'll see those little references to gender and you're like, yeah, okay, I see what you're doing here.
Okay.
But it's in the name of the children.
Okay.
Always in the name of the children.
Yes. Got to protect them. All right. We'll see you later, man. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
There you go, man.
Yes. Yeah. Great interview. Loved it. I thought that was really good. It was great. It was a great interview.
I thought it was really good. Yeah. You cocky bastard.
If you're not like too familiar with this topic, she's going to walk you through the birth of this movement, how we got here. Yep. It was a great chat.
That's what I wanted. That's basically what I wanted to do, is kind of show the history, how it started.
Where we've been, where we are, and where we're going.
Mm-hmm.
So we will wrap it up there. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that as well. If you are tuning in for the first time, welcome to the Political Orphans. Normally we do take a lot of comments. The show is based on audience engagement, but when we have a guest like that, we usually just let them go and do the thing. If you want to support the show, please consider becoming a member. You can do that through YouTube for the low price of $2.99 per month. You can also buy us a coffee in the QR code of your upper left-hand corner of your screen. And of course, you can always just come back and throw some comments in there. We will get to them, and that's another way you can support the show. Please remember to like and share the stream if you're still out there listening. And we will see you guys tomorrow night. We'll wrap the week up.
Peace.